Awesome.
Yes, my shit right here. So that's my shit right here. Welcome back to another episode of Road to William. Thank y'all for tuning in. Today's video, who we rocking with today? Today, we're rocking with none other than Bell Hooks. So Bell Hooks, I have not heard of her before, okay? And that's why we're about to learn about her. So she's an American author. She was born in Kentucky. We're gonna dive in a little bit. Y'all know how I do Wikipedia too. So her full government is Gloria Jean Watkins, but people know her by her pen name, Bell Hooks. An American author, theorist, educator, and social critic who was a professor at a college. She was best known for her writings on race, feminism, and class. The focus of Hook's writing was to explore the intersectionality of race, capitalism, and gender, and what she described as their ability to produce and perpetuate systems of oppression and class domination. She published around 40 books, including works that ranged from essays, poetry. She published numerous scholarly articles, appeared in documentary films, and participated in public lectures. Her work addressed love, race, social class, gender, art, history, sexuality, mass media, and feminism. Her father was a janitor, her mother was a maid. In her memoir, Bone Black Memories of Girlhood in 1996, Watkins would write of her struggle to create self and identity. All right, y'all, we about to dive in. That was a little bit about Bell Hooks. Let me know before we get started. Let me know in the comments what's your favorite book from Bell Hooks. Put that in the comments. Tell me something about her that I don't know. So we're learning about her today. We're gonna go over a few videos, see what she's talking about. Let's get it popping. Shout out to always and forever Afro Marxist. Shout out to y'all. Make sure you like this video and subscribe.
Hello, I'm John Siegenthaler. Once again, welcome to A Word on Words. Our guest is Bell Hooks. Welcome, Bell Hooks, to A Word on Words. This book is called All About Love, New Visions. It's your, as I count, 18th book. That is a high achievement to be an author with 18 books. And this one, about love, approaches the subject from a fascinating perspective. You say at the outset, maybe in preface or introduction, you say that as a small child, you knew love, and then somehow it was taken from you. You lost it. And in trying to rediscover it, you found it was terribly difficult to do. And that when you would talk to people later on, and I'm moving ahead now, when you would talk to people later on about your search for love, people would say, no, you really need to see a therapist. But talk about, because you write about it so eloquently, talk about the need of children for love if they're going to have it throughout their lives.
Well, I start off this book saying that I felt as a child what it was like to be loved and to be recognized. And then I felt that love move away, particularly talking about my relationship with my father, which I think that lots of people feel that our intimate connections with our mothers remain forever. But many adults have talked with me now about their sense as children that they held their father's regard and love at a certain moment of time and then lost them. And I've been amazed at the number of people that have come up to me after reading the preface and said to me, that's exactly how I felt as a child, but I couldn't tell anyone, because we're not allowed to talk about not being loved in our culture. We're made to feel that everybody knows love. I mean, I talk in the book about all of these people who'll say, my dad beat me or mom did this, but she really loved me. And a key chapter in the book is the chapter on children, where I'm saying that no, in fact, if we are being abused in any way, we are not being loved. That love is antithetical to abuse and to domination, and that um, marvelous moment for me in the book when I'm talking about what do we teach our children about love? What is the miseducation we give them? And part of the miseducation we give them is that you can violate someone and then say you love them. And I think as we ponder why we are raising a nation of violent children, we have to ponder that miseducation about the nature of love.
You recite that cliche of Papa with the strop or the switch, saying, this is going to hurt you more than it's going to hurt me, or I'm really doing this for your own good. And then you sort of attack that thesis, saying, why, if that's the case, is that happening? It is an act of violence, not an act of love. And to put another coat on it really covers up the myth rather than exposing it.
Which doesn't mean to say that I'm not saying the discipline is important, because discipline is crucial to any true love. With that, we have boundaries, that we set boundaries. So that I think part of what's happened to us as a nation is we have confused discipline with a kind of blind obedience to authoritarianism, whether it's children to parents or us to a government or a nation that is acting in a way that is autocratic and wrong. So that the book doesn't just try to look at our personal relationship to love, but what's happening to us as a nation as we move away from the kind of ethic of love that many of us felt undergirded all the great social movements for social justice in our society.
You say that we really, as a nation and as a society, forgotten what it is to really love, to find true love, and that it's evident in our music. We used to sort of go, let's croon about the moon in June in tune, and now we come up with lyrics from Tina Turner and others.
What's love got to do with
what's it? What's love got to do with it? That's right, and that the culture itself has hardened.
And especially the youth culture. I mean, one of the things that's so disturbing about gangster rap, and let me say that I'm not attacking all hip hop, there are lots of forms of hip hop, but in its most brutal forms, it's anti-erotic, it's anti-female, it's anti-life, it's a cult of death. And one of the passages that I quote often in this book is a passage from the Bible, from the book of John, that says, anyone who does not know love is still in death. And we're at risk at being a culture that cultivates this sort of worship of death. And it is fascinating to me that, when I think about the defining movement for social justice that we had in our culture that rocked the world, was a civil rights movement. The fact is, there could be no end to apartheid in South Africa today had there not been a civil rights movement in the United States, whether we're talking about Aborigines in Australia or so many people around the world that look to the civil rights and freedom struggle here in the United States as emblematic of justice. But the heart of that movement was an ethics of love. When I began writing this book, I went back to Martin Luther King's Strength to Love, which was such a marvelous book. And he was one of the first leaders in our society to really talk about love, not as a sentimental emotion. Many of my readers, my bell hooks readers who are used to the hard-hitting, social
feminist,
exactly, have said to me, well, why love? And people have said to me, we hope we're not going to lose that, that biting intervention. And I said, but to talk about love and the relationship between love and ending domination, whether we're talking about racism, homophobia, class elitism, because a lot of the book talks about greed and how
It does.
greed has made us less loving as a nation. I mean, why do we think welfare is bad? We should be triumphing as a nation that we have the resources at our disposal
No,
to
you said-
provide for people in love.
You say there that we now embrace the reform of welfare, not on the basis that there was needed compassion. We use welfare abuse as the excuse to cover up the fact we've lost our compassion for those who have nots.
Exactly. I mean, I have been so disturbed by seeing so many people of my generation who came out of radical thinking into a kind of thinking that says we can't give to others. People only appreciate what they work for, or there's a lack of compassion, a hardening of the heart. Marianne Williamson began to talk about that in her book, The Healing of America. I mean, it's this sense that the kind of love ethic, and I think people have to hear those two words in combination, love ethic, which means that it's the values. I mean, we talk about family values in this nation, but we don't talk about what are the values that underlie a love ethic, the sense of respect. I mean, I say to people, well, love has to do with respect. When we look at children, particularly the violence of children against children in our nation right now, part of what we're seeing is a lack of care, a lack of respect, a lack of understanding. We're seeing envy. I mean, envy is a crucial emotion connected to greed, and that you want to destroy what you envy. When you have a 10-year-old kid wanting to destroy another kid because that kid is more popular, or that is something deep and profound. That is a deep and profound lovelessness. And we can't just talk about it in relationship to what parents are doing. We have to talk about it in terms of what we have been saying as a nation, what matters to us as a nation.
You know, I knew that you had written previously to both feminist and themes and racial themes. And so it didn't surprise me to find in All About Love that you say gender as, and that concept that men look at love one way. That has really sort of inhibited our ability to meaningfully bring the search for love to an end as a society. Talk a little bit about that concept of the role that gender plays.
Well, just recently I was talking about love at the LA Public Library, and a man in the audience said that, you know, growing up, I wanted to be loving, but I had gotten the message that you could not be a man and be loving. So he wanted me to talk to him about how do men in our culture move into a space where they can have that healthy masculinity that is not the patriarchal dominating masculinity, but one that allows them to claim the space of their own hearts and their own need for love. And one of the major studies I think that feminism has brought forth is our emotional neglect of adolescent males. You know, the idea that somehow when a boy starts turning 12 or 13, we suddenly decide he doesn't need affection anymore. If he wants to be aloof and not speak. I mean, one of the stories that I tell in the book and that I remember from my childhood, I have 5 sisters and 1 brother. And as my brother was getting, I guess, his patriarchal masculinity happening, he comes home from school one day and we're all sitting around in the living room and he races in because he's going to go out and be with his buddies. And he races past all of us and he goes to his room and he races back out, and Mom stops him just as he's going to go out the door. And she says, "We need to start this over. When you come into this house and your sisters are here and I'm here, you greet us, you acknowledge us. And you go back and you do that over." And it was, for me, an incident that stayed in my mind, that instead of allowing him to assert that kind of negative masculinity that says connection doesn't matter, intimacy doesn't matter, all that matters is my kind of homosocial bonding with my male buddies, I felt that she showed us, both her daughters, the respect that we should want to have in our relations with a male, including our brother, our father. And she enabled my brother to see that this connection is important to you. And I think that many men have been falsely led into thinking that love is not vital and important to them. And early on in the book, I talk about the fact that despite the fact that we live in a culture where we basically believe love is a woman's issue. But most of the books on love that have become, kind of our sort of archival texts, I think of the one I talk about and praise so much is Eric Fromm's Art of Loving, that as a teenager, when I wanted to know what is love, I went to that book. And it's still, to me, a crucial book. But in general, we don't look to books by women. Women write romances. I joke in the book that if a woman had written The Bridges of Madison County, it would never
exactly
have
right. It never would have published.
Women would have said, this is ridiculous.
That's right. This woman out here taking the initiative, first of all, taking the photographs and then taking the initiative. Well, you also sort of give us a preface, just a glimpse. That's what you tell about the story of your brother and your sisters and your family. It would be impossible to tell this story without personalizing it in some ways. And still, much of your writing seems to lean away from personalizing it. But you talk about the end of a 15-year relationship and how devastating it was, and how it set you on your own search to reevaluate your own life in light of the love you saw. You also write later on about romantic love and a relationship with a younger man. Very briefly again, just enough to whet the appetite and make the point. And then at another point, you talk, after quoting Saint Teresa of Avila, about spiritual love in a really beautiful way. I think that it is clear that this book, despite your efforts to depersonalize at times, is a very personal reflection of what you're about.
I thought it was a kind of combination of trying to share the personal, but also trying to say our personal attitudes about love are tied to our culture's politics, to what our nation tells us is important. I mean, that chapter on greed, where I talk about the fact that one of the wonderful aspects of love is giving. And that as we give to others, we grow in our capacity to connect. I mean, the first major chapter in the book says, how do we define love? How can we know love in a culture where most of us don't have a sense of what it is? In fact, the book is dedicated to my ex-boyfriend, the younger man that you just evoked, because we had these continual fights and are still having them after 8 years. We broke up 5 years ago, where we kept talking about, well, what is love? And it was clear that he felt often that he didn't know what I was talking about. And then I talk to other women who say the same thing about the partners in their lives, men who say, well, I don't know what love is. So I try
Which
to
sort of echoes that idea that gender does make a difference in the way women look at love and men look at love.
Well, I think what most men feel, they're not looking at love at all. And so part of what the book tried to say is perhaps if we had common definitions, if we started out from a common point, I mean, what would it mean for us as a nation to start off feeling that love is important for males as much as it is for females? Because deeply embedded in our national psyche is an assumption that love can't be important to men. How will men go and fight wars if they are dedicated to love? And until we begin to recognize that love has to be essential to men if we're going to end sexism, if men are going to reclaim the spaces where they can be connected to their feelings, to their fathers, to their mothers in different kinds of ways. But partially the book says romantic love has been the myth that has, as the only love that really matters. It challenges that notion. That's one of the new visions, that it says the foundation of all our love, like the foundation of a house, there are certain principles that will make you have a sturdy house. And those principles are the same irrespective of the kind of house you're building. The same is true of love. And we have been a culture that has over-valorized romantic love, that no matter how horrible and miserable your life has been as a kid or as a teenager, someday you're going to find this love and it's going to come into your life and it's going to change all of that. And many of us found that that was not so. And I think a lot of men felt that one day they'll grow up and they'll be humanized by a woman or a partner giving them love, rather than thinking about what will it mean, what will it take for me to become a loving person. Well, I mean, I use a kind of M. Scott Peck, who's, I love his
You quote
work.
him a number of times.
I know it probably offends a lot of people that this intellectual is quoting M. Scott Peck, but I felt that his books, I love mass literature. I love the fact that we can have books like The Road Less Traveled, like Thomas More's Care of the Soul, that reach out with broad intellectual concepts to a wide audience. And I particularly take his definition of love as the will to nurture one's own and another's spiritual growth, and link it to Eric Fromm saying, love is a combination of care, knowledge, responsibility, commitment, and trust. Because one of the things that's happened in our culture is we equate love primarily with care. And that's why we can say parents who brutally beat their kids, but who still love them. Because I look at my own childhood and I say in the book again and again, my parents cared for me deeply, but they also wounded me in ways that were violating, wounded my spirit. And I think that I would be a different person today had they not given me care, because I've met lots of adults who didn't get care, but I did not feel loved.
You talk about how your family reacted, how your mother reacted. Again, just a glimpse. When you began to publicly discuss your own dysfunctional family, it was as if she didn't know what you were talking about.
Well, John, I told you when we were talking right before the show began that I see myself as a Southern writer. I see my sensibility as a Southern sensibility.
Yeah.
And we know one of the heart of the Southern sensibility is that if there's anything going wrong in your family life, you don't talk about it. You don't talk about it within the family,
Right.
and you don't talk about it outside the family. So that part of what has been, for me, a radicalization of my being is trying to in a sense claim a new sense of a Southern sensibility, because I think that as I was going home from Nashville the other day to visit my folks in Kentucky, I saw a sign that said something about the New South, and I kept thinking that part of this a New South, because I think the South has a unique sensibility that for me informs my work. The civility, the courtesy, the kind of things I evoke, the community that I write about in
Write
the book.
at length about community and how you can't have love unless it goes beyond yourself and reaches out to a community at large.
And I write again and again that these were the lessons about love that I learned here in the South, in the Southern Black Baptist Church. That sense of what it is to care for the stranger, to move beyond yourself, all of those things. But I think that it's a big challenge when it means us telling the stories that we've been told to keep secret. I mean, I like the chapter in the book on honesty that says, when are we going to face as a nation, and this goes back to our president, that we cannot be loving and tell lies. When I heard about Clinton and the Monica Lewinsky, the first thing I thought about is this man violated not just the codes of some kind of morality, but the idea of the trust and honesty that should have been essential to the fabric of his familial relationships, because his actions didn't just affect himself, and it affected his family. They must live with the burden and consequences of those actions.
You know, I hadn't thought of it until this minute when you brought up President Clinton and his relationship with Monica Lewinsky. But in a very real sense, the public, the national public's willingness to tolerate that and to forgive the lie really
John.
sort of makes your case that love is a lost value in a society that will embrace a liar and a cheater.
Especially when imagine what would it have happened if just imagine this scenario in our nation. What if this couple had come together on national TV and said the essence of our marriage is honesty and communication, and whatever has taken place, it was discussed in the context of our marriage. I mean, that would have really rocked the foundation of everyone in our society, because it says that we all make mistakes and we all do things, and we're not all always faithful. But the key question in love
Now,
is
did I just hear you put the burden on the woman?
not at all. I meant that as a couple, I said
I see.
they would come together as a couple and talk about the dynamics of their relationship, because I still am proud of the Clintons in terms of their relationship as a public couple. It's very hard to be a public person, you know that. I know that it's hard to be a public couple, but I felt let down by the fact that this woman that many of us looked forward up to and forward to how she would progress in the White House, who was a woman of powerful voice, was suddenly silent. And she wasn't saying, we have a marriage and we have determined the terms on which we communicate. Because the heart of love, too, that I talk about in the book is forgiveness. So
You certainly do. You say that it is, and it's part of that larger community. It's in that chapter when you talk about a larger community. Forgiveness is crucial.
well, think about the fact that when Martin Luther King, talked about our nation's ending racism, he talked about forgiveness is crucial to how we as people of color, as Black people in particular, have to extend to those who have wounded us compassion and forgiveness, or we always end up in the same violent place.
And that reminds me of what he said to white liberals. He said, those of you who are and aren't able to say so, in the end, we will liberate you, which was another act of love, not just to those who hated him, but those who supported him but couldn't tell him. In the few minutes that are left, let's focus on that chapter that deals with spiritual love.
Absolutely, because I think that our nation, after all we've said, John, I want to say too that our nation is yearning for love and community. That people want to know how we can live deeper and more meaningful lives. And the focus on the Dalai Lama, the focus on a Buddhist monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, whom I quote a lot in the book, is we have been looking for those spiritual teachers in our life today who can help us return to love and community. And part of what is interesting about us as a country is that the vast majority of people in this country still say they're Christians, when we know one of the heartbeats of Christianity is the idea that God is love, that we are realized more fully as spiritual beings through love. So the question becomes, if we think this, if this is at the core of our beliefs, why are we not living it out in our actions? And that's a kind of political and spiritual question, because I feel like we have to attend to the needs of the spirit. And one of the things that I would say about the American left is that the American left has never been interested in talking to the needs of the spirit.
Its rhetoric is not loving.
Exactly. And that's part of why the conservative right wing always reaches out more to masses of people, because it acknowledges emotional needs. It acknowledges the needs for family values.
I listen to you, and you're losing your reputation as a radical.
Well,
you're talking about
trying to make radicalism be true to the spirit of itself, which is, if you are thinking wrongly, that you have to be willing to change that thinking. I think the left has to begin to talk about love. I mean, was there any more radical movement in our country than civil rights, in the sense that, feminism is radical, but men and women have always lived together. The civil rights movement, the end of a certain kind of white supremacist apartheid, that was about love. And it changed us, and it changed us as a nation for the better. So I don't think that I'm, breaking with that tradition. I'm trying to re-evoke it, because by losing it, we are losing the kind of radical love of justice that has the potential to make this nation be a great nation always, and not be a nation that's false to its own values, false to that notion of really believing in freedom and justice.
That was a dope interview. I'm gonna unpack it at the end.
I began to use the phrase in my work, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, because I wanted to have some language that would actually remind us continually of the interlocking systems of domination that define our reality, and not to just have one thing be like, gender is the important issue, race is the important issue. But for me, the use of that particular jargonistic phrase was a sort of shortcut way of saying all of these things actually are functioning simultaneously at all times in our lives. And that if I really want to understand what's happening to me right now at this moment in my life as a Black female of a certain age group, I won't be able to understand it if I'm only looking through the lens of race. I won't be able to understand it if I'm only looking through the lens of gender. I won't be able to understand it if I'm only looking at how white people see me. I mean, one of the to me, an important breakthrough um, I felt in my work and that of others was the call to use the term white supremacy over racism, because racism in and of itself did not really allow for a discourse of colonization and decolonization, the recognition of the internalized racism within um, people of color. And it was always, in a sense, keeping things at the level at which whiteness and white people remained at the center of the discussion. In my classroom, I might say to students, that when we use the term white supremacy, it doesn't just evoke white people. It evokes a political world that we can all frame ourselves in relationship to. And I think that I was able to do that because I grew up again in racial apartheid, where there was a color caste system. So that obviously I knew that through my own experiential reality, that it wasn't just what white people do to Black people that was wounding and damaging to our lives. I knew that when we went over to my grandmother's house, who looked white, who lived in a white neighborhood, and she called my sister Blackie because she was dark and her hair was nappy, and my sister would sit in the corner and cry or not want to go over there. I knew that there is some system here that is hurting this little girl, that is not directly the direct hit from the white person. And white supremacy was that term that allowed one to acknowledge our collusion with the forces of racism and imperialism. And so for me, those words were very much about the constant reminder, one, of institutional constructs, that we're not talking about personal constructs in the sense of how do you feel about me as a woman or how do you feel about me as a Black person, but they really seem to me to evoke a larger apparatus. And I don't know why they those terms have become so mocked by people, because in fact, far from simplifying the issues, I think they actually, when you merge them together, really complicate the questions of freedom and justice globally, because it means then that we have to look at what Black people are doing to each other in Rwanda. We have to, and we can't just say racism, what have you. We have to problematize nationalism beyond race in all kinds of ways that I think there's a tremendous reluctance, particularly in the United States, to have a more complex accounting of identity.
Bell hooks. If you've been enjoying this video so far, let me know.
It's interesting because my grandfather, my mother's father, was a positive male figure, and my dad hated him. He dogged him out. He was a pussy. He was a this. He was a that. He was not a good enough man because he was peaceful. That was what I most remember about my daddy, guys, how peaceful he was and how good he always was, that he never had a harsh word to say. My father thought, that's weak.
The definitions of manhood that I got as a so-called straight or heterosexual male growing up, you had to be violent, you had to be aggressive, you had to be hard, men didn't cry, and it was something wrong with you if you didn't fight, and it was a kind of policing going on. And it ain't just Black males, again, it was all the males. Like if
Well,
you didn't.
our culture is constantly policing boys.
Exactly.
We don't love boys. Don't let anybody fool you into thinking we are a culture that love boys.
And what you said before we started, patriarchy, sexism hurts us as much as it hurts women, just in different ways. Because it's almost like it's a male prison that we're stuck in. We don't realize you're in this box and you can't be anything outside of that box. And that's what I felt. I was confused. And what I did in college, I joined black male groups, but they were rooted, as you said, in patriarchy and sexism. We were talking about, empowerment of the community, but we're only talking about half the race. It had nothing to do with black women.
Or even when you think about how like white people are so enamored of Ta-Nehisi Coates' book. But you
She
won't
went
find
there.
anything in his book about gender, about teaching his son to see women differently.
Yeah.
And it's all about this whole idea that, and everybody's so happy. The black man is speaking to his son. The black man is reaching out to his son. And, and that's just another kind of bullshit. I said, this book
Wow.
is very much written in Atlantic Monthly and New Yorker speak. And I don't know what young black men is reaching out to, but it's reaching out to a fictive black male, not the reality of young black men for whom a certain kind of language isn't going to draw them in. I think you have to be true to who you say your audience is. Is it a letter to your son because you want him to understand and other black boys to understand? Or is it a letter to white people so that you can let them know you're not like those other trifling Negroes
Wow.
that don't have shit to say to their sons?
Wow.
And I want to say this. Cornel West critiqued the book, and his critique is well taken, but people got mad because they didn't like the way that he critiqued it. And Cornel has been getting a lot of hits for, shooting off his mouth. I mean, do we need to know Cornel saying Obama is a niggerizing president? No, we don't. But if people get beyond that statement to the critical meat of what Cornel says,
Right.
there is nothing he's saying about Obama that is not a sincere critique. It's the way he frames it. But why have we created Cornel now? We used to admire Cornel.
He was Ta-Nehisi Coates 20 years ago. People forget that.
I'm gonna let you go there because he was much more aware.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, he was on the left and
Okay.
he was dissident.
I'm talking about popularity.
Okay, I'm gonna make. But my point is,
Yes, ma'am.
Cornel has been the symbol for us of a black man on the left, a black man being true to everyday people. And I don't think it's any accident that all of a sudden people are attacking him. People be calling me saying, Belle, your friend Cornel is crazy. You need to put a muzzle on him. And it's just interesting to me that switch from people feeling Cornel is someone we should listen to and learn from to a kind of hatred because he's not performing as
That's the key word.
yes,
That's
as
the key
people
word.
feel he should perform. I was on the Vineyard this summer and saw the Baldwin film, which really annoyed me. The reissued Baldwin film where Maya Angelou is reading throughout. And Skip says the same critique of Coates and Toni Morrison that Cornel said, but nobody's booing him. Nobody's challenging him.
Right.
It's like, oh, this is reasoned and rational. It's not, wow, Cornel West. So I think that is an interesting relationship between what happens if black men are emotional.
Yeah.
I mean, I had just had my birthday, and I always have people come over and read a poem. This year was poems by women, and one of the poems was when God says yes, and it starts with, I asked God if it was okay to be melodramatic, and God said yes.
Huh.
But really, who have we allowed other than the black preacher to have an emotional voice?
It's my gosh.
I mean, isn't that why hip hop
Yeah.
has had such an interesting relationship? Because it was indeed in its inception a radical emotional voice.
That's right.
Not just a voice.
A radical voice.
I would urge you to read Imani Perry's Prophets in the Hood about hip hop.
Yeah.
And the whole question of how does hip hop get transformed from being that emotional voice of black masculinity that can talk about a range of emotionalities and feelings to the imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal hip hop.
Right. Right. I'm thinking about a lot of stuff. Since you brought up MTV, I'm going to go there.
Oh yeah, put the blame on the woman.
No. No, Ben.
Just joking. I
No.
can see.
If you haven't seen my Cornel West video, go check it out. I got a few Cornel West. I got at least two, at least, and there will be more. We probably gonna end it off here with her speaking with Cornel West, and then I'm gonna give you my take on things. We're gonna wrap it up with that. We ain't gonna watch this whole video. Shout out to the new school. We're gonna see what they talking about, and we're gonna get it popping.
So we are excited to be here at the new school today. I really wanted to start with a bit of a focus on Cornel because he has embodied in the last few years so much the lone dissident thinker going against the grain. So I want him to tell us what does that feel like to not, everybody used to say, oh, Cornel West, he's so brilliant, he's so deep. And then when Cornel started espousing viewpoints that people didn't care for, they'd be like, your man Cornel, Bell, he's crazy. He's losing it. You need to talk to him. So I want Cornel to talk to us because, Sweet Honey and the Rock say, when you work for freedom, you cannot rest. Yeah. Cornel really has not rested. I was just on him about how many things he's even doing today. So I want him to talk about what sustains him, his spiritual practice, what sustains him. Come on over, my brother.
All right, my dear sister. Yeah, well, I just want to start by saying that it is a gargantuan blessing to stand next to my dear sister of now 30 years. It was exactly 30 years ago we arrived in New Haven as professors at Yale and decided then to be faithful unto death in terms of following our calling, not just career, but our vocation, not just our profession. And together to be able to work together and struggle together and write the book together. We were talking about dancing at the nightclub Brick and Wood on the chocolate side of New Haven together. And the 30 years later, one, just to be standing in and of itself is a blessing, is a major achievement. And so when I think of what I've gone through the last 3 years, I cannot separate it from what in my own Black prophetic tradition we call precious memories. That connect us to something bigger than us so that somehow we can preserve a commitment to integrity and honesty and decency, and to do it in such a way that you're always part of a network or a community or a tradition of struggle. And bell hooks for me, as you all know, not just in Breaking Bread, that's 1991, was it? Something like that. Yeah, that's like 23 years ago. But bell hooks for me has always been one of those central figures and sisters and comrade that allow me to somehow feel as if I can still be a force for good. Not just intellectually, but also morally and also spiritually and also politically. The fact that it's so rare to have a towering public intellectual who puts love at the center of her theoretical and practical work. And that is my tradition.
All right.
It's John Coltrane's Love Supreme. It's the Caravan of Love of the Isley Brothers. It's the love train, not just of the OJs, but the one Curtis Mayfield had in mind when he wrote People Get Ready. And that's crucial because we come from a people who've been so hated.
All right.
Been so despised, been so terrorized and traumatized and stigmatized. How do you find some kind of intellectual, spiritual, moral resources to sustain yourself in order to try both to tell the truth, expose the lies, but also to try to keep the love of truth and justice and neighbor? And of course, as a Christian, I try to love my enemies.
And how's that coming?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Well, Samuel Beckett says, try again, fail better. Try again, fail better.
So are you saying that spirituality sustains you? The work itself, is it sustaining or is it draining?
No, it is sustaining. It is sustaining because, again, you try, for me, the real models are the jazz musicians and the blues women. And when you hear that B.B. King, I'm told, is sick, but he's almost 90 years old. He still does over 250 gigs a year. It's only 365 days in the year. So if I'll do 125, I'm running far behind the king of the blues. And why? Because you find joy in what you do. So that is sustained. No, that's real. And we live in a culture, market-driven culture, commodified culture. That's a joyless quest for pleasure. So the pleasure is insatiable. You never get enough. And yet at the same time, it's so difficult to gain access to the joy. And that's why the precious memories are crucial, because the precious memories are sources not of pleasure, but of joy. It might have some pleasurable dimensions to it. We've had some pleasurable dimensions we won't get into right now. but we talk about joy right now, y'all. We talk about joy right now. So that but that's what keeps you going. And
well, I think that when Cornel and I decided to have our conversation, we were at Yale together, both youngins in the Yale pantheon. It was itself a transgression because nobody had really seen an adult Black man and Black woman stand up and talk together, disagree together, but radiate love and light. And we were on it. There wasn't any topic that we didn't feel we could cover. And it was really a kind of glorious collegial moment, one that you don't often get in academia. And Breaking Bread was for us the culmination of that conversation. Cornel and I just recently did a 2-hour follow-up that I hope to. I have opened an institute. Cornel came. The Bell Hooks Institute. Brother Joseph came. Unfortunately, when Cornel was there, we had some logistical problems, like a tree falling over the driveway. But we
worked it out.
We went on anyhow.
I'm gonna cut back. Let's see what they're talking about in a minute.
That was not what he was seeking. that was not the type of partnership. You have to read his book. What is it? The Love Book.
Which one is that?
Where you tell your stories.
Brother West, Living and Loving Out Loud.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Brother West.
Well, there's different ways of loving, no Bell.
Brother West was a player. Now that we know, over the years, he has raised his feminist consciousness. Are you?
But what evidence you got for that? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. You're absolutely right. And womanist consciousness too.
Because I was gonna say now, when he was in my living room at the Bell Hooks Institute speaking, and I said something about his sexism, he was like, "My sexism," I feel that I have stayed on the forefront of feminist struggle, and so talk a little bit about Hillary, because I used to be on her tip.
Well, Hillary,
yes.
Hillary Clinton.
Yes, I mean, you all may laugh, but for many of us, this has been a real crisis in terms of how we frame feminism, how we frame sisterhood, political solidarity. I can confess, I transgressed. I wanted Hillary over Obama because I saw some radical seeds in her that I didn't see in him where women were concerned. Well, exactly. Yeah. We know that clearly.
Well, they both are war criminals. Both of them war criminals. That's true.
But
Hillary has a longer history of neoliberal opportunism because she's older. But at the same time, as a symbol, now see, Obama as a symbol is very important.
He wasn't to me, but go ahead.
No. It's not just what he was in and of himself, but what he was in the eyes of the vast majority of precious Black people. See, when they looked at him, they saw forefathers struggling against Jim Crow, Jane Crow, terror, somebody now symbolically entering this White House built by Black slaves. You see, now that is in a narrative, just like John Hope Franklin's From Slavery to Freedom, and it's a narrative that is powerful at a very thin symbolic level that cannot be denied. Then the question becomes, who is he? What is he about? What are his priorities? What kind of visions does he have? And it was clear: Wall Street, drones, mass surveillance, no focus on new Jim Crow and prison industrial complex. And
signing the Patriot Act.
Well, that's part of the surveillance.
Yeah.
I mean, he reinscribed it, but of course, killing 4 Americans with no due process, with the Black Attorney General signing on and so forth. Absolutely. But the thing, but Hillary is interesting to me in this sense that because she not only had that longer history, but her husband is so exemplary.
Notice he kind of said that like Beyonce when she says, "My husband." Okay, go ahead. Her husband.
The difference is Beyonce didn't need Jay-Z to do what she needed to do. See, Hillary needed Bill Hillary really did need Bill. That she rode his cocktail and his coattails. His coattails. How does she become? How does she become senator of New York State? She just leapfrog over the whole thing. You see, that's riding coattails. And that wasn't a Freudian slip; it just didn't come out right. But so that's part of the difference. That. But you say for Obama, even Obama's blackness didn't in any way move you when he actually.
Cornel, come on. Didn't we already know how this system is set up? I mean, didn't I coin that phrase, imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchy?
That's true, but I'm talking about something irrational here.
Yeah, well, I ain't irrational.
Oh, I see. All right.
In fact, I remember one of the earliest lectures I gave, people asked me, did I think that his presidency would make a difference for Black men? And I said, similarly to you, that I felt that the symbolic image was so powerful and so meaningful. And I told the story of the two little Black boys employed in the White House, where the one of them says to Obama, "Is your hair like mine?" Right. And Obama can't hardly hear him, so he says, he asks again, "Is your hair like mine?" And Obama says, "Why don't you touch it and see?" And the little boy is afraid initially, but he finally touches it. I see that as the kind of moment we've been talking about in these past few days about what we need to offer our children. Because Lorraine Hansberry loved to say that the only thing that should discredit us in the eyes of our children is that we haven't dealt with this color caste system. We haven't dealt with the aesthetics of white supremacy. But in that moment, he gave that little boy the affirmation. And some little person had told that little Black boy, "He ain't like you. His hair ain't like yours," repeatedly. So that moment was a really deep and profound moment. If we think about all the psychoanalysts who've written about object constancy, the mirroring, that I felt was what Obama offered to Black people, that symbolic mirroring, that when Jackie Wilson said, "Your love has lifted me higher than I've ever been lifted before," for a lot of Black people, that was the messianic, charismatic feel of Obama. But, for others of us, we were looking at his track record, where he stood, and the man had pretty much fundamentally stood in middle ground spaces.
No, and that's true. That's true.
And so, I mean,
it's his language and rhetoric tended to move in populist and crypto progressive directions. But it was just speech. He had Tim Geithner and Larry Summers standing right next to him, you see.
What about the Black people who feel that people like you and I should not criticize other Black people? Even I felt at times like, God, won't Cornel let up on Obama? He just won't let the brother have a moment. And a lot of Black people felt, that he was a traitor, that Cornel was a traitor. And that's when so much hate began to flow. And it really did teach me a lesson about what it is to be a dissident intellectual in this society, how quickly the tide can turn, how quickly people move from talking about his brilliance to people. I mean, so many people saying he was mentally ill. That was so deep. They couldn't say they didn't agree with the brother, that talk about his analysis. But they were critiquing him for personalizing, and then they were personalizing, like, we're going to talk about his mental health. You need to call up Cornel and straighten him out. And
the interesting thing about it, Dusty, when I called him a black puppet of Wall Street oligarchs, they didn't accent Wall Street oligarchs. They just talked about the puppetry.
Exactly.
You see, so just in a metaphorical sense, it's not too clever, but it's still pointing toward a system. You can have white puppets. You can have Catholic, Jewish, Buddhist puppets of a Wall Street oligarchic power in that sense. But they only accented that puppetry. But see, my response was this. I would tell him, I would say, I am a traitor to mendacity. No doubt about that. You see? And that really is motivated by a deep love for poor and working people that begins on the chocolate side of town, right? And I don't love Black people to be popular with Black people. I love them because they're worthy of being loved.
Y'all gonna have to watch this whole thing. Shout out to the new school Shout out to the new school. Go check out the full video. I learned a lot today. Hold on, let me go back. Let me go back. Y'all, I learned a lot today. Let me know in the comments. Did you learn a lot today about bell hooks? Because I certainly did. We definitely gotta go back and find some more dope videos on her. They said she's in some documentaries. I gotta find those. If you know them, please leave them in the comments. I'm gonna read her book and his book, and I'm gonna have to go back and write down the books they had recommended. I'm in my book era. I'm right now um, reading the Nipsey Hussle marathon book. Um, I'm almost done with that. So let me know. And I'm gonna read Courtney, what's his name? It's Angela Bassett's husband, but I ain't even trying to do that to him because he's his own person, and I love his work as well. Courtney B. Vance has a book out called The Invisible Ache. So I haven't started that yet, but I am finishing up the Marathon Don't Stop if you want to read that. Um, I'm waiting on the Charlemagne book. That's gonna be weeks out. Let me see how far that I have to go to wait for that book. I just got done reading the Queen Latifah Put on Your Crown. Available soon. Available when? Shoot. You are fifth in line. Okay, come on, hurry up. Shoot. I be on Libby. If you ain't heard of Libby, it's it's dope. You get all the books, a lot of books you can go vibe out to. Um, but yeah, how I felt about wow. It's anytime I hear someone speak as openly as she does, it's very rare people I see who speak openly about how Black people are raised, um, and how true it is to even my own personal experience. I grew up, and I can relate a lot to her in terms of how I was raised. Like, I got whoopings too, and by both my mom and my dad. And how growing up, I'm like, that's just how it is. Like, that's just what it is. And um, I grew up in terms of where it was like, okay, well, you did something wrong. This is the consequence. You have to go through this. This is why you're getting a whooping. This is why you're on punishment and whatnot. As you get older, as I got older, I didn't get whoopings, but it was more so punishment, or you can't go out with your friends. You can't do this. You're restricted because of this consequence. And I think a lot of times it was more so sometimes there would be conversations, you know what I mean? There would be conversations, but not a lot. It'll be very brief. Um I think I was more terrified of getting a whooping than learning the consequence. Um and but I grew up just like that's what it is. Like, I knew other people in my family got whoopings too. Like, that's just what it was. But I think more so conversation, me growing up and wanting to have my own family and raise my own kids and whatnot, and being with somebody who didn't grow up getting a whooping, sheds a whole nother light on how to raise kids and how do I want to raise my kid. And like Belle was saying, like, you don't have to continue um, this same path on how you were raised, because although I love my mom and dad and I don't fault them for things, there are things I learned from and what I would do differently, and I'll definitely make mistakes as a parent and whatnot, but how do I want to love my child and what would I have wanted as a child growing up? What would have benefited me more? And I think sitting down and talking more helps with communication with not just your partner, but your friends, your loved ones, your coworkers. It all stems from home because if it's like when you're in the wrong of things, how should you move forward? And I was always taught, well, you apologize. Like if you're in the wrong, you apologize and you say what you're sorry for and why. But there's gotta be more deeper. It's gotta be deeper than that because it's like, okay, I need to know more why your side of things. Like, yeah, it hurts you more than it hurts you more than it hurts me or whatnot. But that doesn't help me understand things. Um, and it was sometimes hard to talk to my mom and my dad. And I grew up, just a little bit about me. I grew up being raised by my mom, and later in life, I was raised by my dad. Um, and just seeing the similarities but the differences, they both did not communicate. Like in terms of like we would sit down talk. Like if we did sit down and talk about something serious or deep or something usually wrong, it was usually something wrong. Um, they were similar. They're similar in the terms of they don't really say too much. We gonna speak on this and then we gonna move on. Um, and so, but I could tell they both love me too. I could tell that they just love differently, and they were loving me on how they were loved, and maybe they were trying to do different things in their parenting too. And so I don't fault them. I just learn and and give grace because that's what I would want. That's what I would want for my kids, for me, and but I thank God for pointing me in this right direction for learning more about bell hooks and wanting to learn more and seeing another side, somebody coming out. And when she said it's like you're a radicalist in your own family, I feel like that too. I used to call it black sheep, but it's similar because it's like why are you the black sheep? Why are you called the radicalist? Because you're speaking on things they're not used to. And I had to recently understand that this past year on how other people grew up. And I think with my family, a lot of times it's some things they still hesitate to talk on, and we all grown, you know what I mean? And it's like a lot of times I think because they grew up in a different time of you sweep things under the rug or no, we don't talk about this because of this. And I grew up in the church, and especially the black church is more so like everything's hush hush. You don't really know what's going on. There's always like some meetings, private meetings going on, and then you trying to hear through the grapevine what happened in the meeting, and it's like, why is there secret meetings on on our people? My grandfather, he was a bishop in the church, and he was silenced in the church before he passed away. Things like that. For me, growing up hearing things like that, like I didn't understand why, my grandfather went from one day being able to preach to not being able to. Knowing him growing up, because I grew up, I lived with him, me and my mom lived with him for a little bit, and he reminds me a little bit of Cornel West. I don't know how he would feel about me saying that, but I think he was probably a little bit of a Cornel West in a black church. And Cornel West in a black church, they would kick him out. They would say, I appreciate this video. I still got to unpack a lot of things, but I appreciate this video. I appreciate her honesty, her fearlessness, her bravery to be outspoken in a world where people want you to be outspoken to an extent. And I love looking back on different leaders, Black leaders, especially because I think we take for granted how Black people weren't even allowed to learn, read, write. If we go back, we were taken from our land. People were shunned. People were taken out of this world to speak their mind. And the fact that people speak their mind even to this day, and even back then when it was still kind of scary to do so, I commend them, and I commend Cornel West and anybody else out there who is speaking up and speaking out on their mind. Shout out to uh, Father Venus. Father Venus, he gonna be on the show again soon, and I appreciate him speaking out on Palestine and what's going on in Gaza and everything like that. They're speaking on Palestine and Israel and what's going on out there. I'm going to be speaking on it more too. I'm still learning as well, and I don't want to just put anything out there just to say I did. So I'm learning too, and I'm posting what I feel is the best to post. You know, what's gonna benefit the most for the people who are hurting out there, people out there in Gaza. And so I just want to push people to get out of their comfort zone. And if you're afraid to be you, this is your video to motivate you, you know, and learn and grow. And this channel is all about learning and growing because I don't claim to know everything at all, and I'm just this channel is all about vulnerability and being vulnerable with y'all. They're like, who is this motherfucker? Raw, uncut. I'm gonna try not to edit too much. Come for me. Come for me. Okay, come for me. But yeah, if you want to be on the show, let me know. Put in the comments if you got something going on, if you got music, if you got a project coming out, let me know. Let me know. You got clothing, what you got? You got a business, hit me up. And I'm down. We can talk about some stuff. Yeah, go watch my videos, share them. Share them if you're already subscribed. Hit this like button. I appreciate all of y'all. Rest in peace to Bell Hooks, and shout out to Cornel West. Keep fighting on that journey. Remember to vote in November. Remember to vote. Prior to that, if you got some local voting to do, vote locally. That's just as important. Yeah. Good morning, sis.